Okay, what do I do? Click on continue?
I think, yeah, we're there. Yeah. Um, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Michelle Lanteri. I'm the curator of collections and exhibitions here at the Millicent Rogers Museum. I first want to begin by honoring the Tiwa peoples on whose land we stand here with the museum and with the exhibition that we're honoring today. And so we'd like to honor Indigenous peoples here in Turtle Island and also throughout the world. So this program tonight is in association with a current exhibition here at the Millicent Rogers Museum in Taos, New Mexico. And the name of the exhibition, it's New Mexico Air IAIA Artist Residence in Visual Dialogue. And it's here at the museum through January 29th, 2022. So this is a new partnership with the Institute of American Indian Arts, and the artists that we're featuring in the exhibition, there's 10. They've all participated in the IAIA AIR program, the AIR program. So that's Artist in Residency program. And that was established in 2015. And the 10 artists that we're working with on this exhibition and in these different programs, everyone's based in New Mexico. So we're also kind of looking at that as one of our central themes. So tonight's program, we're featuring Linda Lomahaftua and Erica Lord. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And the name of the program, as you see here, it's At Home and Beyond, Art Practices and Visual Languages in Local and Global Currents. So I'm going to start off by introducing the two artists, and then we'll go into a presentation where we're looking at different artworks on different slides, and the artists are going to share different thoughts about their processes and these different currents that we're focusing on. First, I do want to honor the co-curator for the exhibition. Her name is Donning Pollen Shorty. She's of Taos, Pueblo, Diné, and Lakota heritage. And so she's a figurative artist who works in micaceous clay, and she's also an IAIA alumna from the Museum Studies program. She's an arts educator at Vista Grande High School here in Taos, and she comes from a family of artists. The two artists that we're going to be speaking with tonight, so Linda Lomahaftua is a Hopi Choctaw artist. She was born in Phoenix. She earned her high school diploma at IAIA and her BFA and MFA at the San Francisco Art Institute. She served as a professor of studio arts at IAIA from 1976 to 2017. And Lomahaftua has been featured in numerous publications and articles about contemporary Native art, including Native American Women in Art, 1988, Shared Visions, Native American Painters and Sculptors of the 20th Century, 1993, and Manifestations, New Native Art Criticism in 2012. And Lomahaftua's work is collected in private and public institutions throughout the nation. And her most recent retrospective exhibit was called The Moving Land, 60 plus years of art by Linda Lomahaftua at the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe. And it was a really wonderful exhibition to see all of your work together in that show. And there will be a catalog with that show as well. The other artist that we're speaking with today, Erica Lord, she's an interdisciplinary artist who explores concepts that exist within a contemporary Indigenous experience. Born to a Finnish American mother and an Athabascan Inupiat father, her experience of perpetually moving between locations inspires her work's interest in the themes of displacement, cultural identity, and cultural limbo. Her exhibitions include the DeVos Museum of Art, Marquette, the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, the Musée des Croix Branly in Paris, the National Gallery of Canada, and the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian, among others. Lord is currently based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where she teaches at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and she continues her interdisciplinary art practice. So thank you both for being here. Really looking forward to talking more closely about the work in the show, and then also works to kind of put that into context. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go to the next slide here. just to get us going. And if you have questions, audience members, please go ahead and put those into the chat, and we'll have time at the end of the program to address any questions that you have. But we're really looking forward to your thoughts too as we move through the discussion. So I thought we could start with Linda, and this question is for both of you. So can each of you talk about the themes of your work in the exhibition and your deliberateness in your use of medium?
Okay, these are two monotypes that I did last year in 2020, and I was in the Artist in Residence program at Vital Spaces. At the end of the, towards the end of the residency, I knew I wanted to do a print session with Michael McCabe, a master printer. So I created this series prints, and because it was during the I mean, we still are in the pandemic, I feel. I created these prints from some drawings that I had started earlier in the AIR program at the beginning of the program. I had worked on these some drawings that were in the studio, just putting down lines and shapes and just to practice, loosen up. So when I went into print, I brought those drawings with me, and that's how I ended up using them in my prints. So some of the circular images are supposed to, they look like the COVID to me. I mean, it was my version of the COVID, so that's why the one on the left in particular with the dots in it it's a COVID virus. And so the lines represent, like swirling around, that you just don't know where this COVID thing is going to go. But it also has spirals in there, because I was also thinking during the time when I was doing these prints that I had titled one of my smaller collages, Healing Prayers for a Pandemic Universe. And that carried over into the messages of these prints.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about these. Yeah, and so are you finding that these patterns are carrying over into other works then, even now, or?
Oh yeah, so I wanted to do another whole series of these prints. When I did this one in particular, I started out with yellow, and then I went to a blue background, and then it made me think of the colors of the four directions and how it's affected everyone all over the world, the universe. So I wanted to do a whole series of the colors of the four directions. So there'll be, since I did the yellow and the blue, then I'll do the white and the red.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Linda. So let's look at Erica's work here. I've got two slides for you, Erica. Do you want to talk about this series, this work, the themes of it, and how you came about landing on photography for this project?
Yeah, so I guess the theme that's kind of shared between both pieces of work, the sculpture as well, is that I think a lot about identity, and not just, sometimes when I'm talking about the visual construction of race or identity, I use photography, mostly when I was doing my portraits, but when I was thinking about more abstract things like blood quantum or DNA, and things like that, I often will go towards sculpture since I'm using metaphor and symbols and stuff. However, with this one, it was kind of in the middle. I had been thinking about doing this project for a long time, like, going to school and always having to present these cards with you. So that's my blood quantum on the left side and my enrollment number on the right. And one of the things, one of the things that I thought was interesting from other natives, they'd always point out how long our Alaskan enrollment numbers are. They're like, we only have 5 numbers. I was like, I don't know. They all seem to be unique and different rules, but I'd wanted to, I mean, they're temporary tattoos that I got the ink guide to do for me. I was like, I just need them to last long enough to get to the studio. So I was like walking around like this, trying not to smear them. But this one of this, it was originally supposed to be all stitched together perfectly into one photograph, and I just wanted a larger file because of the size of it. They're larger than life, so it's like a little bit larger than my arms if I held them in front of me. But then after I shot them and pieced them together, I liked the idea of this division even more, like physically through my arms, and I'm trying to mimic this. Couldn't quite get the fingers right, but mimicking this crucifixion and thinking about all these different layers of symbols with crucifixion, and especially, of course, the most obvious one, which is the tattooing the numbers on, was it Auschwitz that did that? As I drew a lot of parallels between that. I know that Hitler had American consultants, because like, you guys are so good at getting rid of your Indian problem. What can we do to get rid of our Jewish problem? And so I find a lot of connections there. And I danced around this piece for a long time because I wanted to make sure that it was shown in a way that related to and found parallels in without being offensive. And so I just waited for a long time before I finally pulled this off. But it was most recently shown at the, I'm going to blank on the name because it's hard to pronounce. It's the Holocaust Survivor Center in New York. And the kids whose parents started the center, at first they didn't quite understand like what the connection between Native artists and Jewish artists were, but one of the first images you see when you walk into the show is this. But after the curators walked around and explained this and explained those connections, then they really did like it, and that made me feel really good because I was pretty nervous about this one.
Thank you. And then let's go to the next one too. Really recent work from you. Really honored to be able to show this. If you wanted to talk about this one.
Yeah. And so this, again, sort of, I realized at one point that most of my work is most if not all, my work is self-portraiture in some way or another. And I guess this all sort of, it came from 2 directions. Like on one side, I was really kind of curious about all DNA and RNA work that had been going on. And a friend of mine from undergrad, he's a microbiologist, and he was like, I don't know what you do with these tests, but I thought you'd like them because they're colorful, and which are these microarray analyses tests. And he was like, so every time you get tested for a disease, they grade your little DNA on a slide and run it through, and the colors and patterns will tell you whether or not a disease is present in your body and how much or how advanced it is. So I had these images of these little color bar tests kind of floating around in my head for a few years. And then fast forward a few years later, I was down at Bead Weaver here in Santa Fe, actually, and found these little 4mm cube beads, and something clicked, and I was like, I know what I'm gonna do with this. Like, and the form, the shape of it, I like taking traditional objects and trying to apply them to contemporary means or purposes. And so I was looking at traditional baby belts and burden straps, which, you know, you carry a baby or a bundle of sticks or something on your back, and then you tie the strings in the front. But I was like, well, I don't carry babies or sticks or water around on my back. So what would a contemporary burden be? And that's when it hit me, diabetes, and just about when it comes to diseases that affect Native populations disproportionately, we kind of rule the charts on almost every disease. And so I've been making a whole series of these different diseases that I focus on. First few were diabetes and complications from diabetes, and then different cancers. And so the upcoming projects will be combination of diphtheria and COVID. And the only good thing COVID's done for me is that people didn't really talk about RNA before COVID happened, but now, so I'd always just refer to these as DNA belts, but really it's actually RNA tests. So thanks COVID, now you can go away. So then it became these digital DNA burden straps that carry different disease. Each belt or each blanket that I make has each has a different test for a different disease. And to be clear, because this has been written about a few times, this is not my DNA. This is just tests that I've taken from medical studies, because people have always thought that I keep getting tested for all these diseases. I was like, no, it's not my test. So I just wanted to be clear about that. But yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about like this process is digital and analog?
Yeah. So the with the the way that we make it. So I've been working with I first showed, like right after I made my first belt, I was showing Will Wilson the process as well. He was like, ooh, that would work for something I'm doing too. And so we've gone back and forth figuring out new and better ways of creating these, because it takes a long time to, I have the size, 50 inches about, trying to translate these little paper digital things into a large beaded strap. Like at first I would print them out and like hand grid them and figure it all out by hand. It took so long. And so at this point, like, we now will we'll blow it up and we have it kind of fractioned off in different spots. And we have these tile grids that we've been working with, thanks to Will, who figured out that part. And we put these tile grids down on a flat monitor and work with this program that'll break them up, and it'll highlight like, oh, all the red beads are going to go in these spots. And so we put them all in those little buckets, like 15 by 15 grid. And then once they all get organized in their little grids, then we hand it off to, I've been working with 2 student assistants who've been amazing at this. And so we would work as a team. Like one would go from the test to the bead grid. Next person would go from the bead grid and load them onto the strings. And then the next person would bead weave them onto a loom that I had built. Because when I first went to bead weaver, I asked them, I think I need a bead loom, and they pulled out this like little tiny thing like this. And I was like, oh, they're for bracelets. They're small. And they were like, how big did you need? I was like 6 feet. So they were like, well, that's what I like about sculptors. Like, if we don't know how to do it, we figure it out. And if it doesn't exist, we'll build it. And so I just got some lumber and built something, and just like nailed a bunch of little tiny nails every 4 millimeters to figure out my own loom. And so we've gotten to this point so far. Like, it's time intensive, but with my lovely assistants, it's been really good.
Thanks for sharing all that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the process, just all those different steps, and the hearing about how
I just want to say too, I'm really thankful for that partnership and work that I've had with Will Wilson. Like, he was actually my teacher at IAIA, and ever since then, like, he was my advisor and my teacher, and like really kicked my butt and pushed me to become a better artist. And that's something that I try to instill in my students today, that, like, rather than feeling competitive or worry about people taking your ideas, like, look at this great partnership. Like, every time we do a project, like, we improve some part of it or some step, and then we share it with the other person, so then their next project can be better. And I've really loved that back and forth process with him over the years. Hopefully it'll get fast someday. You know.
Thank you. Wow. So let's go to this next one. So this shared slide of both of your works. So I think both of you have already been touching on this. But would you like to talk more about the local and global connections that you make in your work? And Linda, do you want to start with this one?
The local and global. Well, I've been in a lot of exhibitions, and a lot of them have been global. So, like the show, the Works on Paper show that went to Russia, and I was able to go to Russia for that exhibition in Ekaterinburg, and that was really. It was just really a very interesting trip to travel to Russia. I've also been to China with a group with Steve Lawrence and who's the weaver? A Navajo weaver. I forgot her name. I can't think of it right
Oh,
now.
was it Ramona?
No.
Oh, she's Hopi too.
Cody.
Cody. Oh yeah, Cody. Oh. Now she does really bright.
Yeah.
I was trying bright colored ones.
It's a really interesting trip as well. Been to England. I was invited to a international women's art exhibit, and I had a show there. And I've been to New Zealand. I was invited to the first when I
Melissa Cody. Sorry, that makes me. Yeah.
to the first international exhibit in Rotorua, New Zealand. So every time that I've traveled and I meet other artists on these trips, the connections are still there. I mean, we still communicate with each other, and it's been incredible. Traveling and showing it's just been really incredible meeting other Indigenous artists.
Mm-hmm. And with the work that's in the show, it's speaking about the pandemic in this way, creating this visual language to think through it to these different degrees. How do you see that as being like an international type conversation?
Well, seeing everything on the internet, like I'm just really amazed at some of the ways that other artists have created works during the pandemic. And like Erica says, thanks COVID, we've all created some incredible work, and it's just been amazing to me. And there's more work to come. I'm anxious to see what other people will still be doing. One exhibit in particular was the masks that had created. And they were just incredible. All different ways of, they weren't all, functional, but it was just the idea of protecting yourself with the mask from COVID.
Yeah, those were really amazing too. Yeah, just to see where people went with those.
Just to see what Erica does with COVID.
Yep, there's lots of tests for that out in all the medical things that I've been reading. So there's been no shortage of that part. I thought I'd get a lot more work done during COVID, but it was kind of, most of my energy got turned towards making masks. Like I started making masks for my students and sending them to them on the reses where they were like locked down, and they were like, we can't get out to get supplies or do anything. And so I was making hundreds of masks and sending them out. But that too, like I kept telling him, like, just tell me how many people are in your family and I'll make that many masks and I'll send them out. Like, as our numbers are so few as it is, like we can't lose anymore. And that always kept bringing me back. Like, I was already making these DNA belts before the pandemic started, but then after that, it just felt very timely. And it's like, yeah, I think this is where my energy needs to go next. And that is something that parallels all these different indigenous groups or minority groups around the world. Like that, the numbers just, they're not in our favor. And to be able to talk about that through, even if it is abstracted.
Yeah.
That's my check out there.
The photograph, Erica, that your tattooed arms work, have you received international feedback on that, or what kinds of cross-cultural thoughts have you received about this work?
It's been I mean, I know some people don't get it, and like it's funny. Like one of your questions, you're talking about, I guess, conversations with people. Like the conversations I did have with people, like when I was in France or other places, it was weird. It wasn't as much about the art as it was about sort of fascination with the culture, or like one lady in France, I remember, like, recognized me in the photo and she was like, well, I see that you tend to look more native, because that was the photo that was up. She's like, you seem skinnier now. Did you also gain weight to look more native? And I was like, oh my God. Like, and just the yeah, that one. And I was kind of blown away and didn't know how to respond to that. Like don't punch the lady, don't like, just, the things that people assume about us, or their understanding or lack of understanding of our culture and people. I think this is the biggest thing that I took away. And then in other places, like in New Zealand, like really felt like just a further away home. Like, and got the villages felt the same, Rise felt the same, and a lot of things paralleled and understood there. But I haven't, I'm sure there's a lot of bad, I'm sure there's bad reviews about it, but I try to take my own advice with them. Yeah, don't punch the lady.
Great.
I just saw that flash on my screen. That, sorry. I lost track of what I was talking about now.
Well, while we're on this slide, it was a really nice segue into the next question. So I was just wondering, if you wanted to talk more about these works that we're seeing here, just in terms of your background and kind of like how your process has been changing, kind of things you've picked up along the way, moving through these kinds of works.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I was thinking of. So one of the things that I saw, there was big Facebook blurbs online about, because I kept getting tagged on stuff, that people were arguing about the artifact piece revisited again, which there always seems to be arguments over this. And I think someone had said that was arguing that I shouldn't have changed the name, that I wasn't close enough to James's original piece, that and it seemed like they thought I was being disrespectful. And then I had another few artists speak up and say, like, no, we know that she was really close friends with James, and he was my mentor too. And I mean, one of the things that he said, I had this long list of questions, and at one point he's like, Erica, calm down. Like, he's like, I'm done with this piece. Like, this is your piece now. You do whatever you want with it. And I was like, oh. And like, it gave me this permission and freedom to change or keep as much as I wanted. I remember back when I first did it, people were arguing about me wearing makeup and that I play the pretty native. And I'm like, I'm not playing, I just am pretty. But and I was like, nobody talked about James wearing or not wearing makeup, like, and it really felt like this kind of response of like growing up in third wave feminism where like, no, I can be pretty and intelligent and strong. Like I don't have to choose and I don't have to decide. Like I wore makeup because I normally wear makeup, like, and it wasn't, the whole point of it was to present myself as I normally am and then pick it apart with these little signs and stuff. But you know, and those changed of course because the body changed, because if it's performative, medium is the body, and if the body changes, then of course the performance is going to change. So I thought it was, I mean, on one hand, so that's what I was thinking about with like taking my own advice, where I'll tell students like, you know, the best artists don't stop to wait and find out what these critics are saying or not saying about their work. They just move on to making the next work. And that so I decided to stay out of that whole Facebook conversation, because it's like, well, I think what needed to be said was already said, and I'll just let the work stand for itself, because that's done. I do want to, we are talking about revisited again and performing it, because in the past it had to get canceled. There was a second date that was supposed to happen in Alaska and it got canceled. But it was, I was just really fortunate that I got to work with James on this piece. And like I was teaching at Evergreen State College and was talking to Laura Evans, who I just met, and told her that I had done this in grad school. And then she was like, that's a good idea. You should do that for real. And I was like, yeah, right. What I'm going to do, call James Luna and say, Miracle Lord, you've never heard of me, but I want to do your most well-known piece. And she was like, yeah, say that. And so she set it up, and like, and he just was very generous with his time and advice and helped me at multiple points throughout life. And you know, I'd run all this stuff by him, and it just, and when I did face a lot of good or bad criticism, it just, it gave me a sense of freedom. Like I didn't have to answer all those people and those questions, like, because the person that mattered, the only person I really cared about who thought was James. And he said, this is yours now, you know, that was incredible. And I didn't realize, I was like, so how many days were you on display? He was like, only one. What are you talking about? I was like, what? I was like, I did it for 3 days. He was like, so, oh, Eric, I was only there for like an hour or two. I was like, what? So just, yeah, this, I don't know. I'm really proud of it. And I don't think I would have been able to get through. This is my first piece where I have, even though I didn't have to interact with people, I was still on display and could feel them like breathing over me. And one of the things that I did want to bring this up, because I thought it was interesting. I sort of had an idea that it probably would change going from James's body to a younger female body. And I asked him, did you have any trouble with people trying to touch you? He was like, no, no one touched me. I was like, I think I might have to worry about that. And so I asked the Smithsonian, I did this at the Museum of the American Indian in New York. So if you guys can ensure that no one takes photos of me and no one touches me, then I'll work with you to do it there. And we had one full-time guard on me, but by the end of the first day, we had to have 2 full-time guards on me. And that I wasn't really expecting. But so just, I think having that guidance really fortified me and made me feel strong going into it.
Yeah, that's a lot, right? Yeah, just to think about that interaction part of it, which is that, you know, the unpredictable. You just don't know what's going to happen. That whole that bridge, that middle space.
I remember, like, just a little side note. I remember I planned, like, I forgot how cold museums are, you know, that they're below waiting. So I got there and I was like, oh my God, it's freezing. I think we sent out every intern to like all of Lower Manhattan and bought out every CVS of those like little sticky hot pads that you put like thermacares, and like the whole back is lined with those things. Because I was like, I'm gonna sit there and shake if I don't figure something out. And yeah, things you just figure out on the spot, because it's really hard to plan for a performance.
Yeah. Yeah. And the two portraits on the right here, these are two of, they're part of a larger series that you've done in the Undefined self-portrait series.
Mhm.
What would you say about this series, like at this point, looking at these?
Yeah. Well, I always get like, whenever I do talks at museums or something, I would always get some older lady in the crowd that's like, but honey, you don't have to change. You're beautiful the way you are. And I was like, well, I know that now, but like, yeah, I didn't know that growing up. Like I was always not quite enough of one or the other thing. And in Alaska growing up, you know, I was like, what set me apart was my lighter skin and my blue eyes. And like, and when I moved to Michigan, I would always be teased as like the wild Indian or darker skin. And it was just always not quite someplace. And so there's like two things, Kim, this like one, finally getting to the point where I felt comfortable as me. And I felt like this was like only child Erica, like playing alone in her studio. It's just like playing dress up over and over again. Of like, started out as trying to amplify certain parts of me. So it's my native portrait, my finished portrait, this, and then it became different characters and like just over and over, or different personas. Like people would ask me like, which one do I identify with most? And it's this other one with glasses, and I'm like kind of shrunken in. They're like, why? I was like, because I feel like a nerd all the time. Like everyone feels like all of these things at some point, you know. And like my family in Alaska tease me, I look like my father in that top one. I think that is what my dad looks like, but with curlier hair. And it's just like, and that's why they're numbered and they're not, there's not names on them, because I didn't want to influence. A lot of it was about kind of playing off of people's assumptions rather than what I was choosing to put out there. So people would always tell me, you know, you don't look Indian until the portrait with the braids, and then, oh no, I see it. And I was like, really? It just braid? That's all it took? Like braids? And like that tells me a lot more about you and your assumptions than it does about what I'm putting out there. And so it felt like there were these different mirrors, and you know, they're all just, there's no Photoshop. They're cheap tricks of like color contacts and different Halloween wigs. Like nothing is quality. They're not fancy tricks. They're all just simple things, and relying that people were going to make assumptions and stories.
Mm-hmm.
Now people know my face, but I used to be nice to be able to sneak into my own openings and like listen in on what other people were saying about me. And they're like, no, it's the same person. No, it's different people. Like, so now they know me though.
And I think this series, the meanings with it, I think continue to change too, just where everything's going. Like I feel like this idea of like the Hall of Mirrors, like it kind of keeps changing, you know, every couple years or so with, you know, just with like the social media and how we're projecting ourselves, you know, into these different areas, and how personas kind of fit certain spaces, or, you know, kind of looking at the tension between personas in certain spaces.
And honestly, like at the time making them, you know, art school is a whole lot of like justifying yourself to a lot of white men that were like, I mean, how many other mixed race Native women could you be talking to? I was like, I'm not only talking to other mixed race Native women. Do you make work only for other white men? Like, you know, this is not, everyone understands having these multiple identities or multiple sides. Like, it's just that race is easier to see. And so like at one point, you know, people always want to pick a side to identify with your Finnish side more, your native side. Where's your home, Alaska or Michigan? And I always say both. And are like, yeah, but which one? And I'm like, and then at some point realizing like, I don't want to choose. And you know what? I don't have to choose. Like, and then finally kind of grasping all of these things all at once. And I really like it. I felt like the first time I really got like a lot of heads nodding in the audience was when I did a talk at IAIA. And like, I finally was looking at a room full of people that understood what I was talking about, and it felt so good. Like, and I was like, I knew if I waited long enough, there would be people that understood this. And so it's a big part of why I came back to school here too, because it feels nice to come back and come full circle to IAIA, where I feel like I was just telling Lynn, I was only there for 1 year, but I credit that year for turning me into the artist that I am, because something clicked that year, and content and form finally made sense to me. And identity.
Thank you for all those thoughts. Yeah, that full circle is so important. That's a good segue to look at some of Linda's work.
She was my teacher.
There we go, full circle. Linda, can you walk us through some of these works that we're seeing here in terms of your process and your journey?
Okay, again, these are monotypes, and the one with the portrait of my Choctaw family and the one on the right, made me think of, you know, something that you said, Erica, about people ask you, you know, well, where do you really identify with, you know, with your two backgrounds? And same here, I'm Hopi and Choctaw, but I don't, you know, separate. I mean, and this is my Choctaw side of the family, but, you know, I'm Hopi too. And it's just, you know, creating, I guess, I mean, because I identify with both. I mean, there's not one or the other. So
Yeah, like I'd always say, there's no time in my day that I'm taught in my native world that I'm not also finished. No time that I'm in the regular white world that I'm not simultaneously native. Never,
yes.
never choosing inside you.
Anyway, so I started using portraits of my family, my work, collaging them onto my prints, Shinkole. And this is my Choctaw side of the family. I have done some of them on my Hopi side, and then I'm trying to figure out a way to, you know, put it all together with Hopi and Choctaw. The one on the left is my Four Rivers series, and it's a story about migration story on the Hopi side of how we came to be, how the Hopi came to settle where we are today in northeastern Arizona. So I just remember my grandfather always talking about having to cross the Four Rivers to get to where we are today. And again, you know, very abstract, but it's my version of that migration story. Again, using the spirals to represent life journey.
You use spirals a lot. What does that come from?
Yeah, again, the spirals are represent the life journey, how you come into the world, and when you exit. So that's it, and it's like it's also showing like a migration path. So that's what I use the spirals for.
And Linda, you've talked about you're influenced by petroglyphs.
Yeah, I did a lot of petroglyphing, I guess you'd call it. Visiting a lot of petroglyph sites, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and then going back to the spirals. In New Zealand, they have a lot of spirals that they use in their work. And again, in northern England, where I visited, some of the sites, stone circle sites, some of the places that I went to also had spirals in their pecked into the stones as well. I just thought that was really interesting.
Wow, yeah, that is super interesting. Global connection there. You also do seem to work with the night sky a lot too.
I do, and I attribute that to when I used to live, when I was teaching, I used to live north of Santa Fe, 15 miles north of Santa Fe in Pewaukee. So a lot of times commuting back and forth, you know, I would see the night sky going back home. So I did a lot of, looking at the landscape at night. And, it's just beautiful at night as it is in the daytime. So I did a lot of nightscapes as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing these, talking more about the connections too. And yeah, it really does look like the spiral is kind of such a main part of your work, just really central thread through your work. So let's go on to, got a couple other slides here. So Linda, I had put these works together, and just bringing these together too, I was kind of starting to see more connections. How do you see, we were looking at the spiral, how do you see the connections between your Four Rivers and your pandemic series, even though, different topics, but like when we look at the visual language, you really start to see, it's really your signature style.
Very similar. I guess the flowing lines, and again using the spiral, and even almost the same color scheme, except for I don't have the blue in here. In the pandemic ones, but it's just the way I work, abstract. So they just always seem to end up looking, even though each one is different, it's still it has the same kind of flow.
Yeah, it's interesting too how you can kind of create like a symphony of symbols together on a theme, but yet there's these bridges between these different time periods in your life too. It's kind of, it's like you're carrying it with you, kind of with the different works that you're making.
Yeah, and I never actually really saw together like this, but it just carries over. It just continues.
It just gets bigger and bigger. Are these two yellow ones intended to be together, or are they two separate pieces?
They're two separate pieces. When I was looking at them to put in this, I noticed that this connection of this red line at the top, the red
And
line.
at the bottom too.
Yeah, they just kind of, I was just really surprised at how they just kind of went on over into the next piece. And that was not a mistake, but it just happened that way. I was really surprised.
Yeah, and yeah, we have these here on loan at the Millicent Rogers, and so we have these arranged like kind of close together on the wall, too, in this order, so that you can really see those connections. You can really see how the one piece flows into the next piece. So yeah, just wow, they just speaking to each other, just this conversation that's continuing on. So let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. And Erica, I had put these two together, just kind of thinking about how you've been working over the years, and how, some of your pieces kind of create really interesting dialogue between each other.
Skin a lot. And like with the tanning one, I remember thinking at the time that like if all these different means of talking about identity, like skin color, eye color, hair color, enrollment, inner, who's in, who's out, like because you're like I know constantly being told what I am and what I'm not, and these were chances for me to say things or to challenge things like, am I looking more native, or am I just trying to bring up ideas of what other people think more native looks like? And then another thing was that I kept thinking about, like, if skin is the topic of contention, then maybe skin is the platform for which I should speak about this. And so it was an interesting process trying to tell the like tanning bed guy that I need to bring my friend in with me. It's nothing weird, I swear. And at the time, if you just told them you're Art Institute students, they're like, oh, you weird artist. Like, okay, fine. Like always doing stuff, but like it was easy to turn those letters on. It's really hard to get them off. Like, months and months of but it was, yeah, just kind of thinking a lot about what skin means in so many different ways, and what it carries. And I mean, I think that's a big part of like those tattoos, you know, that it was something you carried with you, on you. And on the other end, things like the lines on the back of my neck up there, that's a point of pride. It almost looks like hair, so it's hard to tell, but yeah, I wasn't ready to get chin tattoos, and so I got them on my neck instead. No. So yeah, I guess I use skin a lot, and to keep going back to it and thinking about it and revealing but not revealing.
Yeah. Are there words, I know you did a few pieces in the series with the tanning project, like after you were finished with that, are there words that you thought about later, like, oh, like maybe that's something to come back to? Or
yeah, there's like a list of a bunch of ones that I keep thinking about doing, and like I thought about going back to the undefined self-portraits, because like I have real wrinkles now and not ones that I had to like draw in I did before. So I'm kind of curious to see what different characters I would think of now, like, and how, because yeah, my skin is changing along with me, you know, and what I feel comfortable putting out there or not, or just kind of wanting to return to these things over and over. Remember when I was first doing artifact piece with James, that he was like, this has been interesting to work with you on this, because he's like, it inspired him to then go back and redo half Mexican, half Indian, because he's like, however many years, 20 some years later or something, and he's like, yeah, seeing how he's changed over time, and it's just really nice to have that too, back and forth with him. But yeah, so yeah, I keep, once I finish with all these beads, which will be a while, because we're making a whole dog team right now of little doggy blankets that are all carrying. So Balto and all those stories were about, you know, like the dog sled team that brought the diphtheria serum from my village to Nome to save the village back in the 20s. And so I was thinking about that story, because they trained it up to my village and then they ran it by dog sled. And some people argue this too, but a lot of people say that that's what the Iditarod was supposed to commemorate, was that 1,000-mile journey from Nenana to Nome. And so I was thinking a lot about those little decorative, these little decorative dog blankets, like jingle bells and stuff on them. They're not for warmth, they're just for decoration and like kind of a grand arrival if you were coming into a village. And so I was thinking about those dogs being carriers. And so half the dog team is going to carry diphtheria and half of them will carry COVID as these new and old pandemics, like literally carrying these codes of solution, hopefully, with them. And so that's a big project. Like, and that's going to the Wren Gallery in 2023. So like maybe be able to sneak a few photos in there, but at the moment I'm just like up to my eyeballs in beads.
Oh wow. Oh wow. So we're just a few minutes away from the top of the hour. So if anyone in the audience has questions, please go ahead and type those in. I see we do have one question here from Mario, and his question is, so whether spirals, text, or numbers, you're both using imagery that can be read as writing. I was wondering to what extent you think of your practice as a form of writing, if at all.
That's good. Linda, do you want to?
I'll let you answer that, Erica.
Sneaky. So I think like in my drawing class we have an assignment with like image and text, and I always point out to them, you know, like whether it's like conceptual art, which is always have these like title heavy meanings, you know, with that combination of image and text, or fuse it like in the way that I use it. Like that doesn't always need to be illustrative. Sometimes it can be something to throw off your viewer or push them to think about something in one way or another. And all of this, I think, like art, using the text in the art, like all of it, I keep thinking of as like, you know, they're all different means of communication and translation. But I think in my artist statement, I say something about like I view my art as a means of reacting and responding to the world around me, and reconciliation in a way of all these things that I didn't really understand growing up or struggled with growing up, and that these are, through my art, found this voice of being able to respond articulately in a way that made sense to me. And, but so maybe there's something there.
Yeah. So do you feel like this process of like writing visually, do you feel like that's changing like every decade, or do you think it kind of changes just with just rhythms like in your life? Or
I think it like maybe with life, like I know that in grad school, like I've gotten out of my habit. I used to write every day, and I still write with my projects a lot, like that it is a really important part of my process, that like I'll make and then I'll write down a bunch of stuff to make me kind of let it sink in, and I'll make a little more and then go back and forth. And it's like asking myself questions and then answering and going back and forth and just kind of musing. And I need to get back in the habit better of like writing every day, because that was it was meditative, and I think it helped center my practice. And so I'm getting there, I think, like and that too started at IAIA. Like I would just happen to wander into a poetry class and they talked me into being a creative writing major. But it's yeah, I think that I always do best when I am writing at the same time I'm making, and I'm working on that. Always meditation, I guess.
Linda, I remember when you were talking, it was several months ago now, but you were talking about, you know, during the pandemic, you had been making these drawings, and that you were just working with this paper that you had and kind of making drawings as part of your practice. I think you had just moved into a studio like during your residency with, I thought it was the IAIA residency. But how do those factor into your process, just like kind of sketches that you do?
I normally don't do sketches before I do work. I mean, I do some really small, you know, they're not really sketches. I call them more like doodles.
Oh.
But not for every piece, you know, sometimes I just like to do lines like these squiggly lines or free flowing lines. But I don't always use it in the piece that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Erica. It's been so fun, really exciting to hear so much more about your work. Really honored to hear everything that you shared tonight. And we did get a thank you from one of the audience members, Jean. Thank you for being here. Thanks to the audience for being here. And we do have one more program in this series, and so it'll be on Thursday, January 20th. And the name of the next program, it's Strike a Pose, Fashion as an Artistic Framework. And so for that program, we're going to feature Orlando Dugai, a Diné fashion artist, Cara Romero, a Chemehuevi photographer, and also Wayne Nez Gasson, a Piqueries Pueblo and Diné sculptural jewelry artist. So we hope to see you for the next one too. We'll be getting the word out and the registration information out to you here pretty soon. But thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
You.
Do we stay on or do we wait? What do we do?